this is our final panel discussion of the day, the Procurement Strategies Forum. Now we're going to cover a lot of ground this one, so we need plenty of guests to do it. So my guests are Dean Ocampo, Director of Product Marketing at ServiceNow. Also joining us is Rajeev Karmacharya, Head of Strategic Sourcing and Category Management at Fannie Mae. Also joining us is Clive Rees, Vice President and International Chief Procurement Officer at Fujitsu. And finally we have Mark Gilham, Evangelist at Enable. Dean, Rajeev, Clive, Mark, thanks for joining us. How are you?
Great to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good to see you all. Good to see you. As I said, we have an enormous amount to cover in this one because it is such a wide subject. So I'm going to start with some fairly open subjects, and frankly, I'm going to allow you to bounce off each other because I've seen you both in the, seen all of you in the green room before coming through here, and you were having a good chat apparently. So I'm just going to set you off and leave you to it, really. But where we're going to start, though, is the biggest challenges facing the sector, particularly when it comes to the strategy here. For you, I'll start with Dean. Dean, what do you see as the biggest challenges?
Oh gosh, there's multiple things going on at the same time. I think one is, if I just look at it from a meta perspective in procurement, I come from a technology background. Procurement's been underinvested compared to its peer organizations. If I look at the amount of money that's gone into the front end, that's gone into the e-commerce, and then even within procurement supply chain, fulfillment, logistics, digital manufacturing, has gotten tons of money over the years, but procurement's really been underserved. So if I look at just some of the challenges and a lot of the efforts now, it's in kind of the spaces that I kind of would expect coming into the SaaS model, AI, and analytics. So I think part of that is just taking some of the new budget and taking advantage of it. I do think there is a greenfield area in procurement, because I think this one's a little different than other parts of the organization. I think it's often said that procurement and supply chain are team sports. And I think there's an opportunity for a lot of organizations to start figuring out, getting away from, how does this one transactional system work? How does the ERP work? And start rethinking the nature of work and getting into what is transformed other parts of the business. And that's getting into more of an engagement layer where you're seeing people starting to digitize workflows and digitize decisions in those workflows. So an organization can really put all the different people together and have a conversation and work together as one, so it actually becomes a team sport. So if I look at kind of where the opportunity is to overcome those challenges, are really to leap on that engagement layer and bring people together in with the transactions. So I think those are some of the opportunity areas.
Okay, Rajeev, we'll come to you next on the challenges. We'll push more into the opportunities shortly, but it's good to identify what those challenges are, and then we can start taking those apart in the opportunities afterwards. So, Rajeev, the challenges that you're seeing at the moment.
Yeah, I agree with Dean. I think the underinvestment sort of in procurement, and then the challenge of having to do more with less, right? Especially in the context of, the things we see around complex business environment. We talk about supply chain risk, supply chain challenges, the need for innovation, the need for speed, the need for agility, and I could go on and on. So I think, from a procurement perspective, it's really been more about how do we create a team and a capability that is able to meet those challenges in an agile way and be able to deliver on, not just about the, cost savings or contracts, to really deliver on the business priorities. So that's how I'd frame it.
Okay, I'll come to you next, Clive, please.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question. Good way to start. I guess I think there are multiple tasks that we are now asked to do in procurement. Some are very complex and some are sort of repeatable process. So I think it's a question of tracking back to the basics about what we are here to do and how we are here to help our organizations grow and make more revenue and make more profit. And what we do, if you look at it back to basics, is we manage relationships. We manage relationships with our internal clients, our stakeholders, and we manage relationships with our external third-party suppliers. And it's about, I think, because we've got multiple tasks now, the challenge is the prioritization of those relationships and where to put our focus and our resource and where to put our energy and where we'll get the best return. So, and I won't delve into some of the opportunities, but where can we make a difference, and what are the technological sort of developments that we can use to help shape those relationships? That I think for me is the challenge. Apart from all the other normal challenges that we face, it's where to place our bets, if you like, how to prioritize what we do to enhance the relationships that we manage.
That's a good way of phrasing it. And Mark, I'll come to you last on this one. The challenges.
Yeah. So I look at this slightly differently, more from a finance perspective. And I've spent a lot of time working with procurement teams as an accountant. And I see new things coming along that are, so for example, ESG, it's a new task that generally is now going to sit more in the procurement role. It's a new responsibility. Technology is continually growing, and being able to adopt that technology. I mean, Clive mentioned it's a relationship type role, and all of a sudden we're starting now to talk about data and analytics and all of that. Dean mentioned about connected. For me, that technology isn't siloed. So we need to actually, as a procurement team, not be siloed either. And so it's building all of those internal relationships so that the process follows with the data as well. So I just think it's a growing role. We've got a lot more responsibility. And Clive summed it up brilliantly with where are you going to focus your time first?
I think between the four of you, you've set this up beautifully. We've split up so many different areas that we can actually discuss here. And Mark, I'll pick up what you raised there about ESG. So let's separate that, because that is such a big factor in this. When it comes to strategy around ESG, and I'll put this to all of you, and we can unpack this again, is where are we on that journey in particular? Everyone has got a strategy. How are people going to develop their strategies to make them make a difference from your experiences? Clive, I'll start with you on this one, please.
Wow, you come to me and I'm scribbling furiously. So sustainability is becoming more and more important. I work for a Japanese headquartered company, and it wasn't sort of 4 or 5 years ago really on our agenda. We talked about it, but we weren't actually putting it into practice. So we were, I have to be careful what I say, we were doing things, but we weren't really embedding it into our day-to-day world. And in the last 2 or 3 years, we have done that, and we've started to do that. But back to the point about prioritization, you can't do it all at the same time. And one of the things that we're looking at now in conjunction with our headquarters in Japan is which aspects have we started in which particular regions around the world, which have worked, which have been more difficult to implement. And then, do we focus on the environment? Do we focus on CO2 emissions? Do we look at other aspects of what you would put under the ESG heading? How do we also make people aware of what we're doing? And how does that then track back to how it enhances our revenue? Because whilst it's a good thing to do for the world and for society and the future, from a business perspective, there is always some form of payback, and therefore it enhances our reputation in the marketplace. It enables us to win new customers or retain existing customers. So, our strategy on sustainability, ESG topics is ever changing. And from a Fujitsu globally perspective, we're looking to sort of work out what our start points are in different markets, in different countries of the world, and work out where we then try and develop those so we've got a consistent approach. So, I mean, I wouldn't go into too much detail, but it's an evolving thing for us, but it is now front and center of our strategy from a procurement global supply chain approach. Oh,
I was going to say, I really like the fact that you framed it in the context of prioritization, right? Because ESG, as we all know, it's a very broad sort of, term, and there's a lot of things that can be put in that bucket. I'll tell you from our perspective, obviously for us, environment is important, sustainability is important, climate change is important. But I'll tell you, one of the areas where we're also focused on more from a tactical perspective is also looking at supplier diversity and how we can really drive that aspect of ESG, right? So I think to your point, there's a lot to do more from a, so good for the company, but really good for the environment and the system in general, and really looking to see where, we as a company can make a dent in terms of making that positive improvement. I love the way you framed it in terms of prioritization. I think we're looking at the same lens and seeing where can we make an impact. Let's start with those first.
I was giggling a little with the premise that everyone's got an ESG strategy, and I agree with that, but I think what's funny is when you get down to the practitioner level and you start looking at how companies are working, I would argue most companies have a set of ESG tactics that aren't connected. And I think that's one of the failings is you might have one corporate strategy, you might have one group looking at it, but it's maybe a point in time. The regular person doesn't care about it. I think for ESG to be successful, I think to Clive's point, it's really got to be part of how you live and breathe. It has to be built into your processes. I mean, just think about the end-to-end process. When you're looking at sourcing and trying to figure out what vendor you want to work for, of course you want to look at the ESG rating, but you also want to look at, is there an ESG intelligence you've had in the past we were working in? So it's got to feed into your selections. It's got to feed into the onboardings. You do the right qualifications. You do the right reviews. It goes into product selections. So you figure out what the optimum for the overall solutions. It's got to plug into your initiatives. So all those things that are going in there, feeding data, comes in your analytics. You can take a look at your overall goals. It's got to get feedback from day-to-day operations, or actually the suppliers actually meeting it. And you have to stop thinking about it as a point in time, because regulations change your view on ESG. So if you want to look at something different tomorrow, you have to go back to 10,000 different suppliers and ask a different question. So I think really for ESG to be successful, we have to stop thinking about it as a point in time or someone else's job, and more something that I have to live and breathe, that is permeated through my entire process, and then ESG can be successful.
And I think as well, the other side of this is, everybody's procuring to sell. So you need the customer to actually want to buy as well. So you can have the best ESG policy and you could be the greenest company going, but if the customer, the end customer, if that's not what they're actually looking for, the continual journey is instead. Simplistically, I've always looked at it as, when you're buying, you're looking at price, quality and service. Those were kind of the big things to make sure that you ultimately service your clients. But that doesn't encompass ESG. So price, quality and service could be importing from China, as an example. But that might not be. Now you've got a new box you have to tick now. And because you've added a new box, how do you allocate a cost and a value? I think, Clive, you mentioned it. How do you put numbers on this to be able to actually say, is this the right or the wrong thing? Because it isn't a yes or no. There's varying degrees of how green something is. So whereabouts is the right place for the needle? And so, I think it's a really tricky and evolving area.
Well, one theme that seems to have come out loud and clear already is the growth of the function, of the procurement function. It has to do so many more things than it used to even just a few years ago. One thing I'm very keen to do in the event today is trying to find tangible things that people can take away with them. So we've got an audience of people who are probably having to juggle all of these different priorities in their heads. The ESG, the price, the basic things like that. What advice would each of you have when it comes to juggling what could almost be seen as completely separate strategies? There's so many different threads that they have to do to wrap into one predominant strategy. What advice would you have? And I'll open that up to the floor.
I'm happy to go first. I guess the obvious, and it sounds very practical, but write down what you're aiming to do at the start of the year, and we call it a strategy. And we've got 5 pillars. Keep it relatively simple, but then on a quarterly basis, we review the progress against each of those goals to see if they're still in line with what the business is trying to do, because the business will shift and change and pivot depending on what the market conditions are. We should shift and change and pivot to support the business. So on a quarterly basis, review it and adapt it is the simple message from me. Over to you guys.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. You have to be able to adapt, and I'll tell you, what has worked for us, and we're pretty big on category management model, and the reason for that is we really want procurement to be the experts, right, in our categories that we buy. But why that's also important is it allows the team to be experts. It allows the team to have a really good understanding of what's important, what's changing, right? It's not always the same goal. It's not always the same target. It's not always the same priority. So really being able to bring those, bring that to bear in terms of how we solve for those business challenges and how we solve for what the business is looking to do. So I think for us, that model, the category management model, has really helped us to bring that holistic view and to bring that flexible approach to managing all the priorities that we have to juggle in our sort of the new role in procurement.
I was going to give a little bit of a practical, a little bit of a psychological point of view. I was thinking in terms of the economic headwinds. There's no surprise. A lot of procurement is under pressure to cut costs, et cetera. And I've seen pretty consistently across the clients I work with a very U-shaped approach to projects. And the ones I'm seeing where they're kind of getting the best focus is kind of the duh, obviously, and that's the ones that are closest to a specific KPI part of the business. So obviously focusing on stuff that's going to have a near-term return. But my actual surprise is the flip side of the U-side curve. I'm actually seeing a double down on digital transformation, but specifically it's digital transformation with specific requirements. So it does pick a part of the business. It has a tangible focus and financial return is built as part of it. So I'm seeing that as part of it. Part of the psychological is, I think, as procurement, and this is going to relate to the U-shape, is procurement needs to start thinking differently. 10 years ago, you asked every procurement person what's their focus. It's going to be, I'm going to reduce costs. But increasingly, most of the leadership now is going to be a conversation between cross, but I'm also here to help my business. There are times where we're trying to go into business. I'm going to spend more money. I'm going to help them out. So it ends up being a bit in negotiations. So when I see that U-shaped curve, the digital transformation projects that are succeeding are ones that a review of that project not only looks at the tangible results, but looks at the attributes and says, when I have to turn the gas on and the economy returns and I have to start spending, getting more product, getting faster turns, which one of those has the same underpinnings that are going to do that? So I think part of what you do with procurement is not just think about cutting costs, but think about how am I going to be set up to be the winner when business comes back and says, how do I grow and how do I grow faster?
Sorry, go ahead. I had a counter on what Dio was saying.
Go for it.
I think there is obviously focus on digital transformation, and we totally believe in the technology, the capabilities there, right? So that's important. But I also want to point out, I think it's not just the technology piece for the challenges today. I think the piece that often gets sort of less sort of attention is the focus on the people and the skills. I don't think it's, if you think about today's challenges, it's no longer about procurement skills alone. I think it's no longer about, I'm going to get the best person to negotiate this deal, right? I'm going to get the best person who knows how to source it. I think it's really about how do we get our people to have that right mindset, that problem-solving attitude. Like I'm here to help you. It's not just about reducing cost. I'm here to get you your business priority, whether that's cost, could be cost, right? Or maybe not. Maybe it's speed to delivery, it's speed to market. So really, I think in addition to the digital piece, there is the component of making sure we've got the right mindset in our team. We're really, investing in developing and cultivating those skills in our team. I think that's also super important.
Yeah, and I think just that actually I completely agree with. And Clive mentioned earlier the relationship piece. That is the at the core. We can't, and people can't forget that still exists. It's not about getting bogged down in all of the other bits. You've still got to make sure that those relationships are being nurtured, and the younger crowd that are coming through who perhaps a little more standoffish when it comes to these kind of relationships, that those skills are then being imparted on them. So I think that's key. On the technology piece, the biggest thing I would say, and I see it across whether it's procurement, finance, sales, technology is great, but only if it's the right technology. So we hear lots of ChatGPT. It doesn't mean you have to use it. So my view is always adopt the technology that is going to make the biggest difference for you. So it comes back to that prioritizing piece. And so I think there's lots of technology we could all adopt. But go out and find the bits that are going to free up your time so you can do more of the things that have more value.
Now, Mark, that set me up perfectly where I wanted to take things next. It's kind of the elephant in the room, and that is the arrival and growth of AI technology, which is becoming more and more prevalent. Is it a silver bullet for improving things, solving problems, or how important is the human aspect alongside that? How is that going to be best used? I appreciate I've asked you about 6 questions there, but how do you see that fitting in going forward? And I'll open that up to all of you.
I'll say I hate to be the downer here, but as a technologist, I love ChatGPT. But if I think practically in terms of procurement and supply chain, I think it's going to be a long ways off till we see meaningful changes to our business. I think there are parts of the business that's going to be great, things like virtual agent, et cetera. But realistically, if we think about the panacea of generative AI, where I can have a machine learning algorithm look and saying, based on all this data, I'm actually seeing here's a core problem, I'm going to generate a recommendation for you, we're a long ways off. And I think that actually is a human problem. So to this point of human beings, so much of technology in this space has been focused on bits and bytes. Do I get a purchase order? Do I get a bill rating? All these little pieces. But when it comes today, like, what does a human do? And then how does a human evaluate something as good or bad? Well, those things are completely in a manual process. They never get captured. So it's almost like, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the answer is 42. Well, what does that mean? Well, we have a bunch of databases with 42, but there's no context. And I think that's going to be the long-term slog as our procurement professionals think more about working with other teams, and we start getting our information working better, but we bring humans into the equation, and you start seeing judgment calls of this was successful or this directly tied to a boost in revenue. Then systems can start relating success to it. And only once you get that in there can things like ChatGPT work. I just have to mention that ChatGPT works now because it works in the human language model, lateral language understanding models that Google and Microsoft have done for years around language. They've built that database. That data set does not exist in supply chain. So until we solve that problem as an industry, it's going to be hard for us to see those advancements like ChatGPT beyond the border cases of like virtual agents, et cetera.
Dean, I get most of that. I agree with you. I think it's not going to your question at the start there, it's not going to solve everything, and we shouldn't expect it to from day one. I think it will help us. In procurement, we have lots of data and we make lots of decisions each day. And we get decision crossroads that will take us down a different route. And if we make a wrong decision, sometimes we find it difficult to find our way back. But so in theory, artificial intelligence should give us the opportunity to make better and more informed decisions, but it won't make the decision for us, or it shouldn't anyway. And interestingly, just a quick additional comment. I was reading an article on artificial intelligence where it was talking about, you put something in at the start and out pops the answer at the end, but you've got no way of logically following the pattern, and you can't see or trace the decision-making process to get to the end. And traceability and how it gets to that point and what are the steps are things that I think we still need to understand more, as opposed to blindly accept what comes out the other end when you put in your question. So I don't think it's the answer to everything. I think we've got a long way to go to understand how it works and the validity of what comes out the other end. So I'll stop there.
Well, I mean, from my perspective, I've worked with lots and lots of data, but data on its own isn't that useful. We've got to understand the business that the data relates to. And that's where it's going to struggle, because the only way to understand the business, there's a lot of tribal knowledge in most businesses. And so it's actually getting out there and understanding why we're seeing these data trends, or what's causing that. And that, in many cases, is not written down anywhere. And so I think AI has got a long learning curve before it can actually blend the two pieces together and really commit to them. But I think, right to your point, what it potentially could do is help you maybe clear the distractions so you can focus a bit more on the important things.
Yeah, I was, from my perspective, I was going to say, I think, I've been involved in a few different panels around AI, and, look, I think we all agree, from a procurement perspective, there's lots of potential, but probably not a lot of use cases that we can, really implement right away, kind of thing, right? Definitely, potential application across the supply chain spectrum. But going back to specific to procurement, I think in the near term, the ones I am excited about the most are, AI, the use of AI on things like spend analytics and contract analytics. And let me talk about that, in a little bit, why that has the potential. In the spend analytics, think about the richness of data available and standardized ways of categorize spend. If you think about that, and from a business case perspective, that analytics can not only drive efficiency, but also real savings by giving you a full view of the spend and savings potential. So I think there's a use case there that's coming pretty soon. I know there are companies already working on that stuff. The second one we've actually experimented with at Fannie Mae is around contract analytics. Think about implementing AI-powered contract discovery and analytics tools that really allows for efficient search, comparison, and drive insights. Imagine having a tool that automatically highlights red lines that are high risk, or proposes, alternative languages on contracts, right? Because we know, we have a model that says, this is what's acceptable to us, whether that's, liability, whether that's insurance requirements, or whatever the case may be. We could, use AI tools that could actually help us be more efficient about identifying risks, in a contract model. Similarly, we've also tried, we've actually experimented with this as well. We've looked at intelligent tools to score red lines across various suppliers. When we get contracts and red lines, we can actually score and say, what, we're gonna base our award decisions on, the number of red lines and the risks associated with those red lines. So there's definitely potential, but I think we still have some ways to go to get to really using it on a day-to-day basis.
A weapon in the armory more than anything, a tool in the toolbox. We are pushing time, I'm afraid, gentlemen. So I'll just go with one more question for all of you, and if you could try and keep your answers to sort of 30 seconds to a minute, I'd be very grateful. And that is, what do you think's coming next in terms of innovations that will dictate strategy? What's the thing that you think will excite you next in terms of innovations and strategy? And I'll pick, because I think everyone's being terribly polite. So I'll start with you, Dean.
Yeah, I actually made a decision with my career. So I've actually spent a fair amount of my time in data analytics and AI. But I actually, part of why I came to ServiceNow is I think there's a missing element of human beings and helping human beings do their work better. So for me, I think there's a greenfield opportunity with the workflow automation. So I really think that there's really interesting stuff that's going to happen with machines and people working together and making people's lives better.
Okay, I'll come to you next, Rajeev.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, for me, agree with what Dean said, but it's also about the improving the user experience. How can we use new tools and solutions, innovation to really improve supplier experience and improve, our business customer experience? That's what would be exciting for me.
I'll come to you next, please, Clive.
Yeah, good question, isn't it, to end with? I guess the continued and better use of automation generally in processes and data analytics will I think there's a long way for that to develop and a long way to go. So I think making sure we understand what's possible and then how to apply it and how it works in a business that you're operating in is the trick for the future.
And Mark, I'll finish with you, please.
I think, it is the automation piece, and I think it's about aligning supply chains as well. I think we talked about the ESG piece, but I think if we can make supply chains more efficient and again, this is potentially a case for AI, where products are in the right places at the right times. The end consumer, when they do something, it's echoed right through the supply chain so everybody can see what's happening. I think technology, that's going to really stop businesses working in silos and really string them together. I think, I'd love to see that really starting to take off and make everybody a bit more efficient.
Okay, well, they're all things that we can revisit this time next year. So thank you very much indeed for your time. Really enjoyed your company, gents. Thanks for joining us at Procurement and Supply Chain Live, New York.
Pleasure being here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.